You can put it over there. So you like
It's really better than you can.
oh, you do. Actually, it's not right in front.
Jnanam jana shalaya Abhinulam Vita Buddho Kanagavarato Sankirtanai Vivaro Kamalaya Vishwamurti Jaro Vipathamaharo Vande Jagadiyo Karunavataro Vande Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sohito Gauraya Vishwamando Shikrasando Tamondo Yasada Parivadnam Vishnu Yasvaram Shurichitam Sharanyam Pradyatiham Pranadakala Parapisutam Vande Mahapurushate Charanarvindam Vande Mahapurushate Charanarvindam Surexit Rajalakshmi Starya Vajasaya Radha Mayamriyam Taritaipsitam Amaravar Vande Mahapurushate Charanarvindam Vande Mahapurushate Charanarvindam Varnavare Bambo Varnam Rastarari Sannyasi Vyakshamasanto Nishtashanti Parayana Krishna Varnam Visa Krishnam Samupam Vastu Varjanam Yadaya Sankirtan Jaya Noma Vadanaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Gaura ki jai, Jai Ram, Jai Krishna, Jai Radha Govinda, Gaur Premanandi. Nice to be with you all on this auspicious occasion. Great to say something. Pleasure of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu using for all Vaishnavas. Joining us with me. And so the subject, of course, is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance. So this is falls within a broader category of Untitled Chapter. So I've got the two foundational philosophical points of Hinduism throughout all the different sects and different schools to go down to art, of course, reincarnation and karma, the latter driving the former. These will flow and extend into Jainism and Buddhism as well. And these topics are found in the Vedas themselves, of course, in the Puranas, Itihasas, throughout all the entire corpus or body of, let's call them sacred texts of the Hindus. then from a theological point of view, a point that also runs throughout all the sects and flows ostensibly to one extent or another into Jainism and also into Buddhism is that Avatar, of course, is not played out in the Vedas themselves, or the Upanishad, but the seeds for this idea of descent of Bhagavan, the Godhead, is found there. And descent is probably a good English translation of the Sanskrit word avatar, as opposed to the more common one, incarnation, karma, referring to the material body, and even if the descent should be within a material body, it's spiritualized in case of the relation of Charles and so on and so forth. So the descent of the absolute from outside, you know, of time and space within our frame of reference, time and space. And this again is as key, if you will, at the theological point, as reincarnation and karma are philosophical foundational points for the Hindus. And the theory then, if you will, or the idea, the notion, the concept of the avatar, as I said, the seeds of that are found in the Vedas, but when you come to the Puranas, then it comes out, starts to bud, and so forth. For example, we have the Kurma Purana, we have the Sringa Purana, so on and so forth. And amongst them, as you might expect, the Bhagavad Purana takes a very central place with regard to Avatar Tattva. While we have, for example, as I say, Puranas about this avatar or that avatar in the Bhagavatam, we have a very extensive discussion, if you will, ongoing throughout the text about different varieties of avatars and whole gamut, if you will, of Avatar Tattva is covered in the Bhagavatam, from what we might refer to as the allegorical teachings of the avatars, which would include your Kurma, the principle of creation, the power of creation, Matsya, he's the protector of the Vedas, Nrsimha, the protector of the devotees, Varaha, protecting the earth, and so on and so forth. These Leela avatars, if you will, those I've mentioned, a few more, are more or less allegorical rather than historical, what to speak of, or rather than mytho-historical, what to speak of historical. And they have lessons, of course, that they seek to share with us. That's not to say that they don't speak about some aspect of the Godhead that is then manifest in form in Vaikuntha. I had the blessing to be able to visit Varkala once, that's in Kerala, and big Janardhan deity is there. And I believe it was on Janmashtami that I went, and he's a big deity lying down, like, so about 24 feet long, same deity, the Mahavishnu. And on the days of the different avatars, appearance days, then he would be dressed as such. So just as you can imagine, the 24-foot deity lying down, just dressed as Krishna. So there's an idea, of course, that in Vaikuntha there are many planets, if you will, lokas, of the different avatars Another idea in some of the sampradayas that are focused on Vaikuntha as an ideal explains it a little differently, that, as I say here in this example, on the different days in Vaikuntha's time that are appropriate, Narayan will show that particular face, that particular form, expand and something about that Leela, and so on. So I don't mean to say by referring to them as allegorical that they're not real, but they are, comparatively speaking, there's an allegorical section of the avatar, which of course aren't that, for that matter, unlimited, as the Bhagavatam says, asankhya, countless faces of the Godhead. But from allegorical, we go to what we might call a mytho-historical period. A time that is historically one, this is from a modern perspective, of course, that we could relate to or have some information about, but the way in which the history of the time was recorded was through stories that would be are thought to be more mythological. That doesn't mean without meaning, without purpose. That doesn't mean they're not real. And of course, center of those mytho-historical time period and type of avatars, if you will, is Krishna the Avatari, Krishna Balaram, as the Bhagavatam says, the Krishna Balaram avatar. So we find both the allegorical group in the Bhagavatam, we find the mytho-historic, Ram, Buddha, we find Matsya, Hamsa, Narasimha, you find also different Avesh avatars like Parashuram and so forth. The whole gamut, the whole, like in the Bhagavad, one of the principal teaching was topics of the Bhagavatam, which there are 10. One of them is the ashray, which is the shelter of the others, the other 9. One of those 9 is avatar topic. This is obviously misunderstanding, and will be understanding. I think it's accurate. Is another way of emphasizing the key philosophical point of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is Krishna's true Bhagavan Swaram. This is a very important point. Just to give a brief explanation of why it's important. If Krishna is not the source of Narayan, that means that Krishna is a form of the Godhead in Vaikuntha. And in Vaikuntha, there is only Dasya and Sakirasa. That would mean to say that if Krishna is not the source of Narayan, there's no place for Sakirasa. There's no place for Vatsalya Rasa. There's no place for Madhurya Rasa. Narayan may show it and then collapse it, expanding associates of his own to participate in it, but it's not something that can be attained. Again, in Vaikuntha, Narayan is God. He's a little, has some quirks, so, he may show this playful side of Krishna, and that's amusing, fascinating, lovable, adorable, but it's not something we can participate in. You can't relate with God like that. That doesn't happen in Vaikuntha. There's a place for that. When Gopakumar, Sanatana tome and the seminal text of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Priya Bhagavatamrita, attained Vaikuntha, he saw the Krishna Leela, but it wasn't something we could participate in. It's a Vaikuntha form of that. So you get my point here. If Krishna is not the source of Narayan, if he's just an avatar of Narayan, then he doesn't have his own abode. where one can relate with the Godhead in the intimacy of the type of dasya there that's tinged with Saki, Vatsalya, Madhurya, Sakyavasa, and so on. It's important. So in Bhagavatam, we have Avatar Tattva as one of the 10 topics, and it's very apparent the way in which the text is arranged in terms of describing Avatar Tattva. It is done so for the express purpose of shedding light on the Avatari Krishna himself. So you have the one text, which we consider, and for good reason, the central text, the hub, if you will, of the sacred texts around which the others orbit, and in connection with in terms of context, those texts will be properly understood. The relativity of them, interesting point in itself, relativity in scripture. This is actually a central point of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Most of us probably haven't thought like that, but it's a central point. Swami makes it in the Sangarbha very clearly. In other words, well, not every Purana, for example, is something that is of interest even to us, what to speak of serving as evidence or containing mandates that we would be relative to our practice. Some Puranas with a mode of ignorance, some Puranas with a mode of goodness, some Puranas with a mode of compassion. We're people absorbed in that psychic condition, if you will. We may be in that too, but the Bhagavatam is Purnima Saranam Siddham. It is Srimad Bhagavatam, Amalam, Puranam, and Amalam, Pramanam, Vaishnavanam, Priyam. It is Amalam means spotless, so this means not tinged by the gunas, what's being taught there. Through sadhusanga, we can have adhikar for that, eligibility for that. And having attained that, the requisite faith to tread the path, then we will look at different scriptures in terms of their being relative in relation to the absolutes, if you will, of the Bhagavatam, which contains relativity in itself. What's another level of that needs to be considered. But that's it. The point here, the Bhagavatam has an elaborate discussion of Avatar Tattva. And similarly, if you will, as I like to think of it, the Bhagavatam is a theological sequel to the Bhagavad Gita. After all, it picks up where the Gita leaves off. The Gita leaves off with Sarvadharma Jamali Kamasharanam Antam Sarvapati Moksha Yashanamasancha. And the Bhagavatam picks up where Dharma Projita Kaitagotra Paramulya Matsa is saying the same thing. Krishna ends the Gita by saying, give up Kaitava Dharma. Give up the desire for karma and jnana. Dharma Projita Kaitava means varnashram, the worship of many gods, goddesses. Dharma Projita, give up jnana marg. Just take shelter of me. Bhagavatam begins Dharma Projita Kaitavotra. Paramo Nirmatsaram. So Paramahamsa Samhita, Srimad Bhagavatam. And in the Gita, as the Bhagavatam is amongst all the Puranas and all these sacred texts of the Hindus, the Bhagavatam is the most complete explanation of Avatar Tattva. Similarly, in the Gita, spoken by Krishna himself, we find the most direct statement about Avatar Tattva. He says, when Krishna begins in the 4th chapter of the Gita to speak about bhakti, well, I should say, he speaks about Jnana Yoga, but bhakti is mentioned for the first time in the 4th chapter, as he comes out of a short but profound introduction to the chapter that deals with Avatar Tattva. He says, what? I came for what verse? He said, I was here before many births, Arjun, you two, the differences, I remember them all, you don't. This is Avatar Tattva. He's talking about, we need to educate our viewing on this subject. And in the context of that, he says, Paritranaya sadhanam vinashaya traduskritam dharma samstapanarthaya samavama yuge. So this is the most concise statement about the avatar, how we will determine who is an avatar, what is an avatar. Krishna is given, well, here are the 3 basic functions of the avatar. Paritranaya sadhanam, to those who are sadhuna, saintly, I come for them. I come to protect them. For those who are not saintly, I come to deal with them also. And in a broader sense, I tender to ethical and moral concerns. Dharma samsapanartha, sambhavami yuge yuge. I do this again and again. The wonderful thing, of course, about Krishna, and that extends to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one of the many, I should say, is that which helps us to appreciate their status as avatari rather than avatar. Although they avatar, although they descend, they are the source of all other descents. Is that with regard to dharma and establishing of dharma, which I referred to here as concern for ethical and moral life. This is the basic expectation for human beings to be ethically sound, morally stout, religious, and the greater part of all the sacred texts of the Hindu source deals with that subject. It deals with ontologically grounded moral principles. The moral laws that arise out of those ontologically grounded, it means there's a dharma. It means the world is teleological, it has a purpose, right? There is a right and there is a wrong. But what's right and what's wrong, well, that can change. There's some relativity to that. So there are moral principles. Well, what the moral laws are will be determined by looking at the moral principles in relation to the time and the circumstances, applying reason also to that, coming up with, in every unique circumstance, what the law is, what the moral law is. But this moral life, of course, is really like having come out of the wild. We've put you in a cage. From animality to humanity. Before we can go to spirituality, we need to be put in the cage. And don't do this. And okay, you do this, here, get something. Don't do that. I hold it back if you do that. This is varnashram. This is the low end of religious life, which is very high by today's standards. Very high. If we could have a morally stout, ethically sound world where these things were agreed upon, it would be a very pleasant place, and nature would respond accordingly. This is the idea of a bountiful life in terms of nature's provision for us, for our human needs. Nature is there to provide for our human needs. She can't provide for our spiritual needs. For our hows, she can provide. For our whys, our why, I don't mean why, it's like smart, I mean why. Our why, our qualitative questions, well, she can't answer that. She turns us to ourself and ourself to our source for that. That's the greater lesson, of course, that we find in the sacred texts. So, the moral life is hardly the sum and substance of what spiritual life is all about, but it's pretty high in comparison to standards of, well, what we would call society of Dvipada Pashu, two-legged animals, and even Kamsas we're trying today. So the point I'm making is that Krishna, while saying I started, I am the source, Chaturvarna Mayashishtam, same chapter, 4th chapter, Gunakarma Vibhagasa. What does he say? He says, I started this whole thing. I set this varnashram up, but you won't find me inside of it. I'm beyond it. I set it up. But just the implication of that text is I set it all up. It's a moral, social religious system, but I'm the self and beyond it. By participating in it alone, you won't find me there. It doesn't do much for me. It's the cage that if we behave properly, then we can come out of the cage. Right? And that means from karma to jnana, you can come out of the cage now. You're totally civilized. You're not a taker at all. You stop taking. You're halfway there. It's about love. And love is about giving, and half of that is not taking. So you're halfway there. What to take? What can I add to myself? Nothing from the world that I could acquire would make myself more beautiful indeed. Shedding it all it is the road to understanding our own beauty. This is a very backwards way of thinking. Our trajectory is entirely in the other direction for eons and eons. So this is a very radical course, if you will, to take, but it's reasonable. And from jnana, of course, then depends. If you're in the Ramanuja Sampradaya, then from there you can go to Bhakti. If you're in the Bodhisattva Sampradaya, well, by sadhusanga, you can immediately go to Bhakti. And by practicing, then what you get by karma should show up first. What you get by jnana should show up, and gradually taste the Bhakti itself will show up. So the point is that Krishna says the avatars come to establish dharma, to deal with the moral and ethical life, yuga after yuga. But he himself is properly understood in the fullest sense of himself, is not concerned with that at all. In Braj, Krishna is not Brajanananda Krishna. This is the Krishna that we're interested in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Swami Bhagavan, right? Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam means this Krishna. He's not involved in dharma. In fact, the term Leela, central, of course, to our tradition, really applies in its fullest sense only to the Braj, not to Dwarka, not to Mathura. Those are Leelas, but they're not fully play, because there Krishna has something to do. Some things to deal with, worldly things to deal with. Establishing that there's no need to establish dharma in Braj, you want to go there, Krishna said you have to give up Dharma. You have to give up Dharma. But yes, there is a superficial varnashram structure to the Lila. But it's the farcical Brahman Madhumangal, just this person, if you understand the properly, sheds light on how the structure of the varnashram has nothing to do with what goes on there. It's fueled by bhava only, the feeling. In love, there are no rules. And where there are rules, well, to that extent, love is lacking. So Braj beyond the rules. Prabhupada wanted his society is going to be governed by 2 rules. What were they? No, that's a good one, good. No. Love and trust. This is done on love and trust. This is done. Love and complete trust in Krishna. This is Brahmana, complete trust. So, what is the point? The point is that Krishna said the avatars, one of their concerns is with Dharma. But we don't find Krishna in Braj concerned with Dharma. And we don't find Chaitanya Mahaprabhu concerned in the fullest sense of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with either. We'll have to come to that. Because we talked a little bit about allegorical sector, if you will, of Avatar Tattva, the mytho-historical, where Krishna is central, and as such is central to the entirety of Avatar Tattva. I mean, this is very clear from the Bhagavatam. There are all types of avatars mentioned, right? And then we have the historical period. We have the allegorical, we have the mytho-historical, we have the historical. And there's only one avatar in the historical period. Can you guess who that is? We'll get to that. That's what we're here about tonight. So the fact that Krishna's and Mahaprabhu both was the same person, different lila, one extension of the other. How they're dealing with Dharma, some stuff on establishing Dharma. How did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu establish Dharma? Oh, he took the Yuga Dharma and wrapped it together like in a wreath or a garland with praying. He gave that to Nanda Prabhu, and with his 2 hands, he took it and garlanded the whole world with that. This is Nityananda Prabhu's forte, wide circulation, no questions asked. Take it. The limitations of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were, well, he's a sannyasis. Can only have one hand up, the other hand reaching out. Can't let both hands go. He has to destroy the dharma of a sannyasi, which is beyond dharma, right? Sannyasi that marks the end of adherence to the religious law, getting out of the cage and so forth. On the other hand, is of course lost in Mahabharata. So something about Avatar Tattva. Now, because the Gaudiya Vaishnavas are centered on the Bhagavad itself, this is the very heart of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There is no tradition within Hinduism that gives a more concise and systematic explanation of Avatar Tattva, drawing as they do from the Bhagavatam. And from that, of course, we look to Swami. This is one of his great contributions, describing Avatar Tattva. And of course, you'll see it there. This is what I'm saying about it, but you'll see it in the Bhagavatam. He's drawing from the Bhagavatam a comprehensive dissertation on Avatar Tattva leads to the obvious point that Krishna is the source of all of it. avatars. Later, the faithful Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami penned, of course, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, very faithful to the Goswamis. Really, Chaitanya Charitamrita is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as seen by Rupa Goswami, as experienced by Rupa Goswami, through the pen of Krishnadas Kaviraj. So he has a very comprehensive section, also in brief, but very comprehensive, on Avatar Tattva, following the lead of Rupa Goswami. Which not too many people do, but the Gaudiyas do. After all, it's all about Krishna, and to love one is to know one. So no one flatters Krishna more than the Gaudiyas. That's the reason they know something more about it. So, if then we are to appreciate Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as I say, it's important to say a little something about Avatar Tattva in general. And the Avatar, or the descent of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, has, of course, its genesis in Krishna Lila, in the Prakat, the manifest Lila of Krishna. When I was here last time, before we talked a little bit about the Prakat Lila, the Gaudiya idea that comes in Rupa Goswami's Ujjvala Nilmani, that the sadhaka will, in Gaudiya community, will take birth in the Prakat Lila. And from there, that served as a portal to the Aprakat Lila, which we were discussing earlier this morning at some length, the Aprakat Lila. Now that's the mytho-historic, right, realm. So people may have some questions. If you want to go to a place, we're not sure that it exists. That Krishna appeared, yeah, there are those coins, Vasudev and Sankarshan, there's some history about Krishna, but that he lifted the mountain with his little finger, he did this and that. This is where you're pathologizing. And the historical figure, it starts to become exaggerated and so forth and so on. Therefore, it's important to underscore that the Prakat Lila that we know of, is recorded in the Bhagavatam. Where does it come from? What kind of mind does it arise at? What did Narada tell Vyas? Samadhina Nusmrata Vicheshtitam. He said, you are qualified in terms of purification of heart, sense control, and so you can sit in samadhi, do that. And out of that, meditating on Krishna Lila, then come back and redo this Bhagavad Purana. Redo it and give it a new name. Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is the Gaudiya name for the Bhagavad Purana. First he wrote the Bhagavad Purana along with others. Narada chastised him and set him straight and said, enter the samadhi. The samadhi of Vyasa, of course, is described in brief in the Bhagavatam itself, what he saw there, what he experienced. And his whole description, to go to the 10th canto of Krishna Lila, is all arising out of this samadhi. Now, we should probably take seriously an explanation of mind and consciousness, the subjective realm, if you will, from someone who's got some control over their mind. Rather than from someone who can't sit and focus on anything for too long, even though they may have an academic degree and find out many things with their wisdom and insight and research and observation and so on and so, which of course can be deceptive. What the world will show itself to be in one instance may change in another instance. or we may have looked at it and not seen all the way into the subatomic realm to rethink then, or have to rethink the macrocosmic world and how it works from a physical point of view, for example. That's what we call Maya. Maya means, in one sense, to measure. The attempt to measure, bring within the grasp of the gray matter between your ears, the whole picture. If you could do that, it would be very, very discouraging. That's all it is. Nothing to live for. Nothing to live for. Of course, to say that something's absurd doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be true, but it's not. So there's more to life than what meets the eye and the mind. Human society is such evidence of that. I mean, when we look at the evidence in that way, we see that humans are trying to be more. They don't fit. They're going to the moon, they're going to the Mars, they're going to Columbus sailed the oceans. What are they looking for? They're looking for themselves. It just doesn't quite fit. It just doesn't quite fit. It doesn't matter how big you make the room or how far of a distance quantitatively you go, you are a qualitative element. And you have the question, as I said earlier, why? The how questions may be answered by nature, but the why question is a qualitative question. Consciousness is asking it, and the answer has to come from the consciousness side, from the subjective side. I mean, there's a subjective and objective aspect of reality. If we're going to reduce one into the other, why don't we reduce the objective into the subjective, the less complex into the much more complex? Of course, this is idealism to one extent or another, but we are idealists, not in a radical Berkeleyan sense, but in a Gaurian sense. There is a world, objective world, but it's not what it looks like, and it's here today, it's gone tomorrow. And this is actually, from a modern philosophical point of view, of course, and even a scientific point of view, it's true. I mean, what you wanted, some people, the prominent philosophical ideas, to reduce consciousness to matter, mind to brain, everything just physical forces. So a lot of good arguments for that. Well, strong arguments, but not very good ones. But if you want to do that, I mean, it would be good to know what matter is to begin with. We don't know what matter is. We know what it does at times, and consistently, perhaps, in some respects, but what it is, we have no idea. We want to measure consciousness, but consciousness is doing the measuring. It's the rule, it doesn't measure itself. What was that thing you said about swimming? Tiara? Swimming? Water? You gave me a nice example on a plane. Said consciousness can't measure itself. Anyway,
Can't see the water.
can't see the water to swim in.
Can't fish.
So,
From which mind comes the Bhagavatam?
Hmm?
From which mind comes the Bhagavatam from?
which mind?
From
Mind.
the mind of yes.
Right.
Mind.
Mind. So here we have the mind of Vyas. Nara told him, Samadhi and you can sit down. Try it. That's all the Buddha did, is they sat down. It's a simple process. It was just sit. That's it. Yeah, you figure everything out. Well, you figure out a good portion of it, let's say. You figure out that, as Krishna says in the Gita, attachment is the womb from which suffering is born, and I don't want to suffer. So let go of things. Let me just sit down and not run after things. I think that by acquiring, as we said earlier, I become more. reasonable. Just sat. So just sit down. Not so easy to sit down, is it? Not so easy. But the house could sit. What kind of person is that can sit down? We cannot see his or her subjective, internal, meditative experience, but we can see certain observable characteristics and symptoms in them that are extraordinary, that are supernatural. What is that? What is it? Tasmad guru bhagavata jignasu shayutam. What is the other verse? Tadvijnanam, no. Brahmani upashamashrayam. It's the famous verse of Bhagavatam describing the guru and the disciple. About the guru, it says, well, he or she is well versed in the scripture and related texts and other kinds of books from that perspective, and therefore capable of answering questions, dealing with the currents of philosophy in a time, and speaking about it in a relevant way. And that's a big task in itself. But on top of that, and more so, standing in Brahman, and what is the symptom of that? Upashamashraya. This is supernatural. What does it mean? Transcending or arresting the human passions. And he could sit. That's what it means. He could sit. Is that not observable? Yeah, but there's so few of them, we can't take them seriously. Also, some couple people considered in a cave. We had this story about this mystic. Must be exaggerated. This is not. One of the Indigo girls had a song about that. It said, something about the song. How long would it be till?
How long till my soul is right?
Is there anybody that ever reached that height? Yeah, there is. There's a few, but that's where we heard about it. You heard about it. It's not just a story. Someone did it. So there's only one. So what? It's still the example of human perfection, because out of that arises what? As a byproduct, universal compassion. That's pretty extraordinary to feel like that, to see like that. What more could you attain? So there's some objective, I'm going to say, evidence we should take into consideration instead of dismissing sadhus because we cannot verify their subjective experience. Yeah, you could go there too. That's true, but you have to sit and then you have to walk before you sit. You have to walk or talk, and then you can get, then you'll be qualified to sit. If you just talk, well, it's not going to help. You walk, the talk, and this is explained in the Gita. How does he walk? How does he talk? How does he sit? Who's sitting, who's walking, who's talking? They're all connected. There's not a disconnect there. One time I was here in North Carolina, some time back. I forget whose house I was at. And he was giving a lecture, and I was speaking about kirtan, and one Indian gentleman afterwards said, Swami, I think that spiritual life is a private thing. It's a private thing. And this kirtan, loud, outside, this thing is, this was the implication of what he was saying. Spiritual life is more a private thing. I said, spiritual life is a life in which there's no difference between your public and your private life. That's what spiritual life is. God is everywhere. Where is he? Everywhere. So, and actually his gaze is very affectionate and very kind. You shouldn't try to hide from it. Or get away from it. Untitled Vishnu Param Param Shanti. So Vyasa's mind in Samadhi, the Samadhi Bhashya, this is the language, if you will, that the Bhagavatam is written in. It's not written in Sanskrit per se, but Samadhi Bhashya. He says, with regard to the Sanskrit, he says, he says, this is a different creation altogether. And while there may be some grammatical mistakes in here and so forth, no book is perfect, Vyasa says. Just overlook that. Try to catch the essence of what I'm trying to put in words, what's come in my mind and my heart, I'm trying to put in the words. And it doesn't fit. But those words have power, nonetheless, if you let them go in. Of course the words don't fit. Of course the thoughts don't fit. From where mind goes, they return. From where words go, they return. Such is the nature of the absolute. Thank God. Shankara says, words cannot speak about the absolute. We should say, oh, be quiet. We say, about the absolute, you cannot say enough. We always have something to say, but we can never catch up, right? You can never say enough. It's not possible. And we are, of course, acquainted with the qualitative, what would be the term, determinate feature of the absolute, rather than the indeterminate, of which there's really not much to say. There's no talking that goes on there. We're very concerned with the determinate absolute, and his qualities are such that the place in which he lives, not only is there something to do there, the walking is dancing, the talking is singing, and so forth. So from the mind of Vyasa, I mean, yes, we should appreciate this, the art, well, the science, soft science of psychology. It can help a lot of us, just like Band-Aid can help physically. You cut your finger. We tend to think, well, now maybe I'll go to a doctor for a Band-Aid or whatever, for a physical ailment, but I'm shy to go for a mental condition, because on the hierarchy, materially speaking, from sense objects to senses, to mind, to intellect, becomes more subtle. The more subtle it becomes, the closer it comes to the most subtle thing, which is categorically different, the Atma itself. So if I say, hey, you're a little fat, you might, well, whatever. If I say you're stupid, then you might want to fight with me. More identified on the scale as we go higher and more subtle. Therefore, beware of your intellect. Beware of your intellect. It can be useful, but it can end your spiritual life. It can bring them to control. Bhagavatam invites all argument and gives a good passion to the intellect at the same time. Come on. Puts it into place. So, the point is that from Vyasa's trance, this is where the Prakatleela comes from. This description is how Vyasa reacted to the Krishna avatar. How he thought about it, how he experienced it, how he felt it. So if you want to enter the Prakatleela, this is one way to do that. If you, as Rupa Goswami said, you have to take birth in the Prakatleela. Well, we like to do that. And we can look at it literally, and that's fine too. But we have a version of it. Krishna Chakravarti describes the Bhagavatam as a spiritual planet in the world. It's another creation altogether. So to enter into the Bhagavad text itself, into the mind of Vyasa, there you can associate. There's a way through the text to associate with the personalities described there. Personalities whose names aren't mentioned will become clear to you when you read the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. Oh, that's the Lita Sake she's doing like that. This is talking about Vishakati. This is Srinivas. The names aren't, so only a few names there. Find some names in other Puranas. Oh, hey, there's the nectar. The names are over there. So they didn't have time to tell the names. He told them what the feeling, the feeling of it all. So you're going to have to enter the feeling, and then the names will come out, the personality will come out. So this is a very interactive media, the Bhagavatam. It's full participation there. You're invited to. So let's go there. Because we have to go through the Prakat Lila. The only access we have to that is the Bhagavatam. That's not a limited access, the only access. It's the mind of Vyasa in Samadhi. How he understood Krishna and the world that's within Krishna, that Krishna is outside of it at the same time. I mean, is it reasonable to, if we want to talk about mind and consciousness, to turn our attention to such texts properly understood like this as the Bhagavatam, rather than think we'll get a comprehensive answer about nature of consciousness from physical science, even from psychology. It's useful, but helpful, relatively speaking. We should take help, all we can get from wherever, in terms of our horizontal grounding in our humanness, from which we want to grow vertically, spiritually. If you want to grow up very tall, you have to have a good foundation. That's the basic idea, of course, going back to Varnashram. That was the basic idea. Have good grounding. Be balanced. That's the essence of Varnashram. Be psychologically balanced. You're in a better position than to jump up, touch the stars. If you're standing on one leg and you try to jump, well, you might land on your butt instead. Right? So, psychological balance, good idea. But to learn everything about the mind from that, and speak of consciousness is categorically different, super subjective, if you would. So we go to the Bhagavatam, and from the Bhagavatam, we enter the Prakat Lila. So where will we enter? Because the subject matter now is really the historical avatar. We have to go to the mytho-historic realm, and then we'll find the historical realm of the mytho-historical realm. They complement one another. They one arises out of the other, and you can't tell which one is the source. It depends how you look at it. Is it Caitanya Mahaprabhu was giving Krishna, or was Krishna giving Caitanya Mahaprabhu? Well, let's look at it. So we enter into the Bhagavatam. We want to find, we're discussing Avatar Tattva. We found that, let's go the allegorical avatar descriptions for the moment. We go to the mytho-historical. There we find Krishna, and for that matter, in terms of both of those divisions, Krishna, avatar. I mean, it's just so much more captivating. It's captivated the mind of the entire Indian subcontinent, where it has been so much available. Of course, it's being eroded now by whatever globalism or whatever modernity and its ideas and so forth. But such a captivating, I mean, nobody is as captivated in the subcontinent of India, or have been, by even Ram, who's extremely charming fellow, as Krishna would speak of by Varaha, or the boar avatar, or Matsya the fish, or Kurma the turtle. The string is pretty cool. There's 10 chapters of Bhagavatam about it for good reason. He's about to be a particular face of Krishna, right? Protector of his devotees. God, right? So we enter the Bhagavatam. So where will we enter? Where we have to go right into the center of the center. There are three basic aesthetic centers of the Bhagavatam. You have the Vatsalya center. The center is the 10th canto. Within that, you have three aesthetic centers. You have a Vatsalya center, centered around the Damodar Leela. There's 3 or 4 chapters there, where the feeling of Vatsalya is showcased. And you could be drawn in, it's possible. You have the Sakirasa center, where the beginning of the, just beginning at the end of the 11th chapter, and then boom, Brahma Vimohan Leela 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. This is a Sakirasa center. 15th chapter, Krishna becomes a cowherd and so forth. And then, of course, you have your Madhurya Rasa aesthetic center. And in one sense, that's the center of the centers and so forth. So we'll go there. And there, our story, if you will, begins with Krishna and the harvest, during the harvest moon, which is celebrated throughout the world as a romantic face of nature, if you will. Fall in love in spring, get married in the autumn, something like that. So the harvest moon and abundance, a time of abundance and so forth. And Krishna looks to the east and sees the west. He looks to the east. Sunsets in the east, right? Or looks to the west. Sunsets in the west. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. I'm confused sometimes. Thanks. The sunsetting in the west. We look to the east, and of course the moon is rising, and it's lustrous and reddish. It's reddish because the sun is setting and the reflection, and you look at it like that and bring everything down. And ultimately there are no colors, right? I mean, that's reductive materialism that's very popular, in some people's minds, but it filters down into the society also, and people don't realize they're being influenced by it. And life becomes meaningless. Children shoot people in schools and so forth. It's terrible. So anyway, Krishna is looking at the moon, and to him, he sees, it reminds him of the face of Radha. East is the direction of the gods. Here's the moon, full moon. Very charming, reminded of her face, and this becomes an Udipana stimulus for his Madhurya Rasa, and now he's going to play his flute and try to attract the gopis. This is the beginning of the Rasa Panchadhyaya chapters of the Bhagavatam, dealing with the consummation of the relationship between Krishna and the gopis. That it's something that's been building in the Prakat Leela chapter after chapter. Just 1 year previously, there was a Swakiya within the Parakiya. Swakiya means married. Parakiya means not married. Problem. That means what Gopi Vastaharna Leela. That was what's it called, Gandharva marriage. Krishna stole the clothes of the gopis. And then they had to come out of the water to get them. Then to see that it was thought at the time, to see the girl naked means that you have to marry her. So it's done now. So it's kind of a Gandharva marriage, which, by the way, I don't know if any of you have a proper Vedic marriage, but it's worth pointing out that Krishna says in the Bhagavatam, Bard for sure. I think it comes in Bhagavatam as well. That in Kali Yuga, the only bona fide Vedic marriage is the Gandharva marriage, which is a marriage based on mutual feelings for one another. So we're okay. Tell that to the Varnashrami devotees. And Krishna said that's the best. I mean, must be that he feels, what's his reason for uniting with the gopis? Just mutual feeling. Everything else is off the chart, you know. Astrologically, he shouldn't marry them because he's going to be gone for a long time and not return, it seems. His return is not on the chart, but of course he returns because he's off the chart. His life is off the chart. So Krishna blows the flute, gopis come, right? And they hear the flute. This flute is described as Kam Gayatri. So this is initiation within the Leela. You got to get initiated. Oh, what a burden. No, we talked about that the other day. It's a good thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's something I have to do. I must do it. I must have her siksha and association. I'm compelled by his example, her precept, the two of which walk together. I must. This is the feeling. You don't have that. Don't bother with it. It's a big recipe for disappointment. So they went. They heard the Kam Gayatri, and in the Kam Gayatri, they heard their own names. They felt like I'm being called. In Kam Gayatri, Gopal Mantra, and the corresponding Kam Gayatri, you will find everything there. You'll find everything there. So they went. And of course, they didn't know that anybody else was going. And when they got there, they thought, you're here too. You also. And then Saki Pranay. They were filled with Saki Pranay. That's very nice. This Krishna's Kaviraj describes Radha's Saki Pranay, like her body's ornamented with sandalwood paste. This is her Saki Pranay. Saki Pranay means, Pranay is a big term, but it means love. It means that kind of affection that reaches such a pitch that in the face of a circumstance in which the object of your love should be revered, there's no reverence there. It's like, whose toothbrush will you use besides your own? That's Pranay. That's Pranay. No difference between you and me. The Swarup Lakshana of this Pranay is Vishwamdana, means intimacy. Intimacy. It means the primary character, the Swarup of it. The Tatastha Lakshana, the marginal characteristic of this where reverence is required or should be, it's absent. We find this will come in Sakibhav, the pursuit of that. This will come before praying, the external, the marginal characteristic. Pranay is something that is a stage of love that is relative to Sakya and Madhurya. You're not going to find this obviously in Dasya Bhakti, neither in Vatsalya Bhakti, because there's no equality there. So it's about a sense of oneness, if you will, this kind of dynamic oneness with the object of love. And there we find, of course, the gopis come, they see one another. Saki Pranay means the love of the Sakis, of the gopis, for one another. Pranay is very central to Sakya Rasa, but it's also central to Madhurya Rasa. And here we find it amongst one another, it's such friendship. We hear that Chandravali is the competitor of Radha. She's very disturbed that her cousin has led such a trip. That's her cousin. She's the eldest of the Astasakis, Chandravali. But we should be careful. When we hear such things, these are strong feelings that are not predominant. The predominant feeling in church amongst the Sakis, for example, is they all love one another. That comes out in the Raspanchaja, this section of the Bhagavata we're discussing. This is just a beginning example. They all arrive, and they said, "You're here, and you're here, and we all have this in common. It's Krishna." And then there we find Purnima, isn't it? As Krishna starts to tell them, "You shouldn't be here. What are you doing here? I'm just playing a flute. What are you doing here?" And he gives all the dharmic reasons they shouldn't be there, and they show that their love is not covered by karma. Their love is not covered by jnana. They have Purnima. Purnima Gita comes out. They speak. This is important. Remember this now. That they show their love there, and so the Rasa Lila. There's rasa, and there's rasa, and there's rasa. So Rasa Lila is a kind of dance. So the dance commences, right? And of course, then Krishna disappears. What's going on here? They've come all this distance at great risk and so forth. Middle of the night, foregoing family obligations and so forth. And Dharma, what will become of the village if the girls in this village are, well, in that village, the girls are like this. So the whole village will be soiled by that. We'll speak of their religious life and their prospect for moksha. They threw this all out the window to meet Krishna. It's incredible. And he disappeared. What kind of character is he? And so they gather together to look for him. And they search and they find his footprints. Right? They're special. They have the markings of an avatar. Special markings. We'll go into that, but we go forward. So they're distinguishable, at least for them. They're not thinking of an avatar, but they're distinguishable from other people's footprints. Those footprints of Krishna, by the way, when he walks in Braj, those footprints are preserved. In other words, the wind, the rain, the sun, it backs off for Krishna's footprints. That's why during the Kali Lila, everybody could follow the footprint. They thought Balaram was following the footprints, but the footprints were there to lead them. Where did he go? Because the omens are coming, something terrible's happening. Of course, that's not wholly the truth, because nature will also work in another way to cover the footprints when necessary. For Madhurya Rasa. If he leaves too much of a trail, then Radha's man may never be broken. Man is a contrary love. It arises out of Purnima. Without Purnima, there cannot be man. If you don't love someone that strong, you can't be that angry with them. Man means contrary love. The strongest form of that is the jealousy. So if Krishna is going with another gopi and the footprints to it, the evidence, and probably break her man, it would be difficult. His tracks can be covered, and he can make excuses. But there are other forms of man that are softer and easier to break. This is probably the strongest one. It doesn't just mean jealous love, it means contrary love. And it arises out of the intimacy of Purnima. And then out of man will come Purnima. It will recede back and going forward into Purnima. So they see his footprints and they start to follow them, of course, and then Anyaradhanam Bhagavan Hari Ishwara. You know the verse? You're named after the verse. You should know the verse.
Yeah, I'm tired, it's fine. It's basic.
Anyaradhanam Bhagavan Hari Ishwara. So this is, of course, Radha's name is found here in this verse. It means who is worshipped in the best. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Bhagavad Arka Origini Mala, he says, "Oh, this verse is spoken by Chandravali. Radha has worshipped him better. This gopi has worshipped him better." This is her chief competitor, if you will. It's her cousin. He's a little younger than Chandravali. Now, but her Saki Pranay comes out. And Saki Pranay that I just described earlier, of all the gopis, and they think, well, she's shown better. So, that's what Prabhupada used to tell me. Because I was, I'm easy to criticize, and people would criticize me in this kind of Prabhupada would say, well, show a better way than he will follow. It was with regard to like book distribution, things we used to do sometimes. Try to please him, as foolish as we were in our efforts, we were sincere. If you can show a better way, then you will follow. And that's true. I would have just wanted to please Prabhupada, that's all. Went to such lengths. So they're following, and of course, as they see the footprints, they realize, oh, Radha has shown some harm. What did she say? She says, Napare hum. Napare hum. Na, napare hum. And remember this, because it will come again. It says, I cannot do this. Na pare hum. I, na pare. I'm not able to do this. She is separate from all the gopis. She feels a little bit of their plight. She's with Krishna. They're walking. She shows a little bit of man. She says, I can't walk anymore. Maybe you should carry me. She's being a little contrary. So Krishna picks her up and then disappears. And they can see by reading the footprints. Look, her footprints, Krishna's footprints are heavier here. And hers are absent. He must have picked her up. Go a little further. Now his footprints are gone, and only her footprints are there. Oh my God. What must be her plight now, her separation. And then they come finally find her. Krishna's setting it up to show all the gopis. Don't criticize me for taking Radha alone. See for yourself. But she's like, she's the real leader. You see, then with her guidance and her lead, they go to the bank of the Jamuna and the sea. Here we come, and Gopi Gita, right? Tabakatamritam tapta jivanam karivalitam kamasapam Shravana mangalam srimadatatam viviranti ekrita. Verses like this, so Krishna's Kaviraj seemed to feel, this one really moved Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In his description of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela, he has Sarvabhauma give this verse to, Gopi Gita, to Tripurari Maharaj. It says, when Chaitanya Dev falls into a trance, go and sing this song. It's Gopi Gita. Dressed like a Vaishnava, because Mahaprabhu would not give darshan to the king. Because if as a sannyasi he gave darshan to the king, people would think, the sannyasi is being bought off by the king. King is worldly, it's the antithesis. King is the antithesis of the sannyasi. So to keep, to not give any opportunity for the public to dismiss him, he took sannyas so that they wouldn't dismiss him. He was very strict about this. But the devotees were very had heartfelt feelings for Tripurari Maharaj, who wasn't a king. He's a devotee. He would sweep he would become a bungi for the Rath Yatra. Bungi, like the lower class street sweepers. The king would sweep in front of the Jagannath cart. So Sarvabhauma coached him, said he dressed like an ordinary Vaishnava. When he goes, he'll fall into a trance at this point along the path, along the parade. And that time for him sing, let's go to Gita. Then he will wake up and he will embrace you. And when he came to this verse, Tavakatam Vitam Taptam from Gopi Gita, Mahaprabhu Rose said, who is chanting? Chant more. And he embraced the king. So these were songs, kirtan, songs in separation of the gopis. And so we're at 29, 30, 31, 32, found 5 chapter, we were in 4, we come to 32, and Krishna reappears then in response to their kirtan. Their kirtan, their songs of separation, causes the union to resurface. Krishna comes back and he is a little humble, peering out from behind the tree, and then the gopis, they had him on, they were upset with him, they sang, and then they wept, and their tears brought him their tears. This is what it's all constantly. You have to cry. That is how to attract Krishna. Try it. We should weep, but we cannot weep for Krishna. The Mahaprabhu taught this in the Shikshastakam. They wept. Krishna came. And then in that chapter, the 8 principal gopis are described, not by name, but by their characteristics, how they responded, how their man turned into pranay, and different kinds of pranay. Maitri pranay, pranay with modesty, sakya pranay, pranay without any modesty. Oh, there's many divisions and so forth. So Sukadev, without mentioning any names, first describes Chandravala, then Shamala, then what is her name? Padma, Chaitanya, and it turns to Lalita, Vishaka, Bhadra, and so forth. So they're all this, they're known by their type of love and how they respond. And as this pranay is breaking, or the man they're upset with him is breaking and turning into pranay, then he looks at one of them, and her pranay, her man is not breaking. She's biting her lip, and shooting arrows at him with her eyebrows. Not because he's now liking the other gopis, but because he is not. He needs to explain himself. This is Radha, of course. But ultimately, he also pacifies her, and so we come to the important verse here. Remember, we were looking for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So, what the gopis' contrary love turns into intimacy of pranay, and they've got him back. But they have a question. So, the leading question comes from Radha. Wait a minute, what kind of lover are you? Exactly. They go over 3 different examples of types of lovers. And of course, Krishna responds, and he says he's actually none of those types of lovers, in a sense. But the reason, what kind of lover are you that would disappear like this? What gives? So he's going to answer that. He's going to answer that. And this is where we find Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the genesis of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in the Prakat Lila of Krishna, in the myth of historic realm, from which we'll be transported into the historical realm. Stay with me. So I wanted to give longer explanation. Now, we heard previously that Radha said, "Napare hum," I cannot do this. For different reasons. Krishna is saying the same thing. Napare hum, niravadya samja. So sadhukrityam vibudhari saprivaha. Yamaha vajan bhuja rudra geha shrinkala samvishchitadvaha pratya tu sadhuna. So he says, this is pretty significant. You see where Krishna is. This is the center of the whole of Krishna. This is as deep as you can get into Krishna Lila here, in the Prabhupada Lila. And Krishna says, I am not able. God is speaking. I am not able. How could God say he's not able? This is, well, something must not be God then if he's not able. There's something he can't do. If God can't do it, how can he be God? This is Gaudiya Vaishnavism. There's things that God can't do. And he says, Napare hum, and vibhuda ayusapi. Vibhuda ayusa. Ayu means life. So he says, and the extent to which I can't do it, which is what? So sadhu krityam, niravadya samujam. The niravadya samujam, this means keval bhakti, uttam bhakti. He says, you have uttam bhakti of the highest order. Samyujam means like union. Your union with me, it is niravadya. It has no fault whatsoever. There's no fault in your union with me, although it looks like it. That's why you have to pay close attention to the Bhagavatam, right? It looks like this is a bad thing. That's what the Orientalists thought. They thought, oh, this Vaishnavism is very close to the real religion, Christianity, but here in the Bhagavatam, it all goes to hell. Krishna says, no, your union with me, that union was ostensibly was conjugal. What Krishna is saying is your union with me is yogic, actually. In Niravadya, we're speaking of yoga, it's beyond yoga. It's Niravadya. It has no fault whatsoever. It's free from Kaitava Dharma. Krishna says, what is it?
Cheating religion.
Yeah, but he says, in Bengali says, Tama Tamara Ateva Dharma Atakama Moksha Vansha. This is darkness. The desire for Dharma, Karma, Kama, Artha, and Moksha. This is all ignorance. This is cheating. This is Kaitava, the desire for this. There's not a trace of that in your love for me. It is, as Rupa Goswami says, Anyavilashita Sunya, Yanakamadi, Anavritam, Anukulena Krishna, Bhakti. You are the prime example of this. And I've seen your pranay. So follow me, he says. I know you're a little upset with me, but try to understand my point here. Your love for me is faultless. Your union with me is actually spiritual. He's telling us Radharani is a sadhu. So, it's not like feminism is a good thing, socially speaking, but this is not what this is about here, right? This is about transcending the gender altogether, becoming a sadhu. Radharani is a sadhu. I told this to one lady, devotee said, how could I take that's not possible? Radharani is a sadhu? Yeah, Krishna says right here. And he says, Vibhuda, I means like Buddha. Vibhuda means wise. It means, it also speaks of the gods. And amongst the gods, one has got 4 heads. He must be the most wise. He must be Buddha. very wise. In the life of Brahma, you can extend it. People would ask, Buddha means also, it can refer to jnanis who have eternal life. But typically we think, even in the life of Brahma, he says, I can't do it. Such is the measure of love. Even in life, I had the life of Brahma to try, I would be unsuccessful in repaying you in kind for the measure of your love. Therefore, and what is that? Well, it's not that I don't know what you've done. I mean, you've cut the chains, the link, the bond of family life. You said, as I said earlier, you've gone against apparently, ostensibly, the scriptures. You've ruined your religious life, your prospect for moksha, for even a happy life on earth, your family life, what will your children think? You've ruined the village. I mean, you're just the lowest of the low here. From the ordinary point of view, you've put yourself in that situation with no concern for it. If it was necessary, and it seemed to be by circumstance, to meet with me. How can I repay you? He says, it's not possible. He says, Samvishchata Pratiyatu Sadhuna. He says, your sadhuna, your saintliness is your own reward. What he also says here, as Navajo Swami is explaining in Bhagavatam, your sadhunas, your sadhuna. Maybe, at second thought, if I could, the best I could do to repay you I'd have to repay you in kind. So, I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, he's thinking, but I'd have to become a sadhu. What? Krishna become a sadhu? Sadhus, they have at least apparently very difficult life. So many things you have to give up. You don't do that. You don't eat meat. What do you eat? I don't think that so much now, but when I was a kid, yogurt was like as unknown as yoga. So we live a nice life. We're happy, but I mean, from the ordinary point of view, we've given up so much, right? Even though I was the beginning sadhakas. Right? Our moral compass is, if it's favorable for bhakti, I will accept it. If it's unfavorable for bhakti, I will reject it. I don't need varnashram to tell me what's good or bad. This is my moral compass. If you do that, nobody in varnashram could possibly be as moral as you. Even as you break the moral code for the sake of doing it, its circumstance should present itself for the pleasure of Krishna. That was required. We find this in the life of Caitanya. So he says, maybe in a life of Brahma, maybe I could try one life of Brahma after another, becoming a sadhu, and through that, I could repay you by maybe making devotees for you, something like that. This is hidden in the text here. This means that, well, that's what he did, didn't he? That's exactly what he did. Once in the day of Brahma, the flute player, the supreme enjoyer, a fellow told one of my students some time back, that he said, in our religion, we have the real God, the true God, because in our religion, God has performed the greatest sacrifice. And love, as I say, is born from the womb of sacrifice. The Jesus, he was saying, of Nazareth, he performed the greatest sacrifice. Who could be a better example of love? What do you got? Some guy playing a flute, and the supreme. enjoyer. So I replied, I said, that's very nice. I agree with you. It's tremendous what he did. Example of love. But for there to be a sacrificer, there has to be someone who he's sacrificing for, some object. That's the flute player. He's the perfect enjoyer for whom the sacrifice is offered. And it just happens to be such that when you actually give to the center, there is a center, that the center gives back to everything in a way that no other part could, like the stomach does something with food that the hand and the tongue or the mind can't do. What does it do? It sends energy to the rest of the whole body. So here, the supreme enjoyer, Krishna, is to take up the difficult life of a sadhu. This is in Braj, this is just absolutely inconceivable. Gopis, they didn't think, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's try that. And let me tell you something else. It's very important here. Krishna says that he could not satisfy the gopis. He could not reciprocate in kind. He says, I promise in Bhagavad Gita, as people approach, I can reciprocate in kind. That's who I am. There's nothing beyond me. But I cannot reciprocate in kind for your love. That's what he says. I'm not able to. Even if I had a life of Brahma, I can try, and I have to do it over and over again, one life of Brahma after another, one after another, and I'll still never be complete. But I'm in. Sign me up. Such is our love. So what should we think? Just see, Krishna could not satisfy the gopis. The point I'm making here is at this moment, gopis didn't think like that. They were completely satisfied. When they heard him speak like this, and he said, the reason that I disappeared was to see your hearts grow fonder, because if you have something very valuable and then you lose it, the extent to which you think it's valuable will become more apparent. And to test your love, I disappeared. And what it did to you, that's what's just blowing my mind and making me come up with these crazy ideas about becoming a sadhu. How is that even possible? I'm Krishna. Sadhus worship me. What will happen if people the yogis knew my condition at this moment here? I'm in the existential crisis here. I'm saying such things. I'll become a sadhu. What do I know about sadhu? I like sadhu. I'm an enjoyer, right? I'm a what's the term? Epicurean, such as my position. How can you change your nature? Right? That's very, very difficult. How's it possible? And when they heard this, they thought, he is so wonderful. How would he say it like this? He feels like this. He really feels like this. He's being honest with me for this. And then immediately they went, no. Let's dance. Forget this contrary love. Let's dance. They were completely satisfied with it. You have to understand how pleasing this statement is to the gopis. His explanation. They're completely over the top happy with him. They have absolutely no criticism of him whatsoever. And the rasa dance begins. Their relationship is consummated and so forth. Now Krishna has to think about all this. He has to go to bed at night or in the morning. And he's got a lot on his mind now. What he saw, what he said, what he thought, what's coming of me. Well, he has to think about that for the whole rest of the Prakat Leela. The whole time. Even when he's slaying Kamsa and marrying queens and all, he's going to have to think about this. Find his way back there. Come back. Go back into the Aprakat Leela. The Prakat Leela is characterized by separation. The Aprakat Leela by union. You go there, There's no more Krishna going to Dwarka and Mathura, leading Vrindavan for long periods and so forth. There's some separation there, short periods, but not the long separation of the Prakat Lila. And there he's thinking about it. And then comes now we come to the historical period. Right? This is the seed then of the birth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is the historical period. What I mean by that is, well, it's obvious. There are hundreds and hundreds of witnesses to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in 1846, 9 p.m. on Saturday. Just before 1486, excuse me, 1486, 9 p.m. No, on a Wednesday. I think it was a Wednesday. Not it just before it just, and as he appeared, the earth cast a shadow on the moon. How's that? The earth cast a shadow on the moon. That the spotless moon has touched down on my surface. The moon, yes, it's beautiful, but it has spots. Let it be covered by the shadow. That all attention will come to him. Gaura Chandra. This is Vrindavan Chandra. He's now called Gaura Chandra. He's doing it. He's now taking birth to become a sadhu. In a land that is referred to as Sadhaka Siddhabhumi. Bhumi, land where siddhas have the leela of being sadhakas. In other words, he's come, and his associates have come. Some of the elders have come before him. Advaita, Haridas older, his mother, Sachi, Jagannath Mishra, so on and so forth. Now he's appeared, the moon is covered up by the shadow of the earth. And in historical time, the story of the Avatar begins. This story needs to be told to the world. We need the microphone for this. It's an incredible story. We have the earliest historical evidence and descriptions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu come in Murari Gupta's text. It's a Sanskrit text, a very learned person. He wrote it during the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and likely it was published just as he passed from the world in 1534, 48 years. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared, I should go back for a moment, in 1486, in May of the same year, Columbus hatched his plan and presented it to the Queen of Spain. We're taking a western route to find India. Something going on over there that captured his attention. But his exploitive disposition took him off course and came to the Americas, where he found the Indians. Whatever. This is, of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in 1486, and just a couple centuries prior to that, what you find historically in India is this moving away from the religious public, from the religious ideal of an extreme form of asceticism. In Buddhism, you find that, in Jainism, and in Hinduism also. And for example, you have the Shankara, says everybody has to be born in the Brahmin family, you have to become a sannyasin, live in the Himalayas to get mukti and so forth. This ideal was being, in the centuries just prior to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and at his time, being eroded by the texts like Gita Govinda, Jayadev, and Shantidasa's Shri Krishna Sankirtan. It's said in the Subal that book called Subal Mangal, that Subal appeared prior to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela, also besides not only as Gauridas Pandagina, but prior as Chandidas. Love songs there, find. And Vijapati. These authors were all drawn upon by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Anti Leela to augment, with the assistance of Ramananda and Swarup Damodar, to augment his bhava, to assist him in his attempt to step into the bhava of Radhika. He's successful in that. He did pay them back. And he continues to do so. But at any rate, I'm just giving a little idea of what the climate was historically at the time. So these texts were eroded. People were charmed by these ideas. And it went a little to the other side. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes right in the middle of that. Because he was an ascetic in terms of his teaching, Leela as a sannyasi. But he's preoccupied with Leela, the love of Leela, as Radha and Krishna. And his method is singing and dancing. It's not that when the sannyasis saw him in Banaras, like, what kind of sannyasi is this guy? We need to bring him in and educate him a little bit. Don't sing and dance like that. That's for the ordinary people, sensual people, emotional people. You have to get rid of your emotions altogether. Mahaprabhu said, no, there are trans psychological emotions. So, a little bit of what's going on in India at the time, in the world, in the West, of course, you've got the Renaissance and so forth. It's a very interesting time that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared. And people from Europe thinking about what are the mysteries of India, what are the, get some spices from there, okay, something. But he's a hidden avatar. I mean, yes, Krishna became a sadhu, but he's hiding a little bit. It's a little weird for Krishna to become a sadhu. Because if all the religious people find out about it, all the yogis, they may Krishna had to become a sadhu, and I'm worshiping Krishna. My path may be in question here. I thought he was the supreme God. He has something to accomplish. How can it be? So a hidden avatar. And then the books have become, right? In his lifetime, we have Mari Gupta's text. We have Kavi Karnapur's text. What is this book?
Chaitanya Chandrodaya Nataka.
Not the drama. And then we have, these are two Sanskrit texts. We have the Bengali Chaitanya Bhagavat, Vrindavan Das Thakur. A little later, kind of the Chaitanya Mangala, that's very poetic text. And we have finally the kind of culmination of all biographies, Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bengali, laced as it is with Sanskrit. These are learned people. These are the apostles of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There aren't only 12 of them. There's hundreds of them. And they're all Nityasiddhas. They all thought, is he Krishna? No, Krishna. Is he Krishna? They would have the epiphany. They thought if he's Krishna, well, where are Krishna's associates? Because Krishna's not alone. You can't have Krishna. You can't have the perfect object of love without the love. So where are all the devotees? And then they realized, it's us. We're in another Leela. Everything's turned backwards. How do we function here? Trying to find their way, understand Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and themselves. This is Leela. This is Yogamaya's influence. They found on the body of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu after his birth, Nilambar Chakravarti, his maternal grandfather. He was an astrologer. He did the chart and he observed certain symptoms on his body. Sudesha, Sarvasal, Lakshanam, Vita. This is one of the characteristics of Krishna. Sarvasal, Lakshanamrita, he has auspicious bodily characteristics. There's the science, if you will, of what's it called? Samudrika Lakshanam. The Buddhists developed this quite a bit. And so for their avatars, if you will, they look for certain characteristics. It's described there for every auspicious bodily characteristic. There has to be 100 meritorious deeds that are performed. And for every one of those deeds, there have to be 100 meritorious thoughts. For those bodily symptoms, one of them can appear. Nilambar Chakravarti was apparently acquainted with this tradition, and he identified 32 auspicious bodily markings on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I mean, they didn't just make up this idea that this one guy is an avatar. They had a way of thinking about it. They understood this idea of avatar tattva that I began speaking about. There's something to it, how it all works. It's not just some superhero guy. All these people were superheroes. Murari Gupta was a superhero. Advaita was a superhero. Nityananda was a superhero. Every single one of them, if you read the histories of them, from the time, they're extraordinary people. Raj Prataparudra, no one could get into it. No, the Muslims couldn't even get into his kingdom. Gajapati Raj, he had he kept elephants. Probably just say takes 200 pounds a day to feed an elephant. You got to be rich to have a herd of elephants. Keep them. Very powerful. Hindu Raj, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. In Encyclopedia Britannica, it said he's the greatest logician of all time in India. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. He became like a baby before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His logic just melted, just dissipated, and his heart melted when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu showed little opulence of knowledge, which was the expression of his own bhakti that he considered the highest knowledge. Explained the verse of Bhagavatam. Oh, Bhattacharya explained it in 7 different ways. Mahaprabhu then explained it in 13 or 18 different ways, depending on what text you read. And Sarvabhauma was stunned by that. But there was nothing. Later, when Sanatana asked him, I have a penchant for the Bhagavatam, and I heard that in Puri, you gave 13 different meanings for the Padmarama verse, and I wonder if you could share them with me. Mahaprabhu said, by Sarvabhauma's grace, I said something. I don't know what it was, but I don't think I can repeat that, but I'll say something on the verse, and he gave 64 different explanations. I mean, this is in every one of the biographies of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the bodily characteristics, and then the Chaitanya Charitamrita Krishna is giving me the astrological status of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Leo rising, and so forth. It's all the chart is right there. So, from an astrological point of view, which is had strength and value in those days, because they were good astrologers, weren't doing it just for a living. And on the computer program, they actually meditated on the chart. So this is Bhagwan. This is an avatar. So that was a whole. Now they make a popular movie in the West. Some guy's God comes down and has a Joker. You see some of those maybe over the years. But there's nothing here at least in Hinduism, we have a real systematic conception of what the descent will, how to detect it, different measures of it, the Yuga avatar, the Shakti Vesh avatar, the Lila avatar. If you say my guru is an avatar, you would say which kind? And they'll say because this is what the devotees have done. I told in the beginning, this point, avatar tattva, is a core the core anchor, theological anchor to all of Hinduism. In Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you find an explanation, a comprehensive explanation of it. And when it comes to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they concluded, we conclude, and wisely so, this is an avatar of the avatarim, of the source of avatars himself. Why is that? Well, we could give any number of reasons, but here's one. He's interested in Leela Madhurya. Ra's not interested in that. Nisringa. He's not interested in Leela Madhurya. These are not the qualities of anybody but Krishna himself. Leela Madhurya, Veda Madhurya, Rupa Madhurya, Prema Madhurya. This is completely the preoccupation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Therefore, Rupa Swami said, "O Mahavadhanaya, Krishna Prema Pradaya." He's talking about these are his. This is his Leela. This is his Guna. This is his Rupa. Namo Mahavadhanaya. That is his Guna. Krishna Prema Pradaya. This is Leela. He's giving Krishna Prema Madhurya. How can he give Krishna Prema? No avatar can give Prema Madhurya. Prema Madhurya culminates in the Rasa Leela we were talking about. Ra can't give entrance into the Rasa Leela. That's not within his purview. That's not a quality of Narayan. That's a quality of Krishna. Someone who can give that, if he's an avatar, well, he has to be Krishna himself. Krishna dresses a sadhu. Very extraordinary. So they came to this determination, this conclusion, and they've written about it, and successively over the generations coming to this day, so much has been written about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in Bengal, history of Bengal, there are many great people came out of Bengal, like Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, in the 19th century, Nobel laureate, met with Einstein, two different worlds, humanist and scientist, and romanticist and scientist, and you should read what he said about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was given in his kirtan to Bengal. It doesn't melt your heart. And this should be shared with the world. This is our idea. The Eastern Savior, Bhakti Thakur, described him as. He had the qualities of the avatar, the symptoms of the avatar, the chart of an avatar. There's so many texts about him, so many witnesses, and so many miracles. They saw in him. How they determined he's the avatari, the source of avatar, because they saw the other avatars in him. They saw the bhavas of the what did I call them?
That's avatar.
No, the allegorical avatars. They saw the bhavas in him. They didn't see him turn into a boar with a snout, but they saw the bhava of Brahma saw. Nityananda Prabhu saw a sadhuj form. No one else saw it. It said he revealed it to Nityananda Prabhu in public, but nobody saw it except Nityananda Prabhu. He saw the arms of Nrsimha, the protector of the devotees, and the arms of Krishna playing the flute, 2 hands, and the hands of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is one sadhuj form. He had antardarshan, internal darshan. Sarvabhauma had antardarshan of another sadhuj form. He after he heard from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he had a big head. He was smart, as I said before, very sensible and well read scripturally. What did he do? He had the epiphany. He's wrong. He is Krishna. He is wrong. He has the morality, the dharma, adherence to Dharma of Ram, plus in terms of his way he conducts himself as a sannyasi. I thought he was just too young to be a sannyasi. 24 years old. I mean, how are you going to be a sannyasi? Yugo Kishore and I were celebrating the fact that he, came into the 30s. He made it, right? Remember his talk. To get through the 20s, it's not, it's a task. What, speak of becoming a sannyasi, I was fortunate to do that at 25. I had a lot of help. So Mahaprabhu, Sarvabhauma thought, he's old and wise, and he had affection for Chaitanya Dev because his father was related to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's grandfather. He made a connection, he traced it out, and he liked him. He thought, poor kid. He's taking in madness. He's taking sannyas at 24. I better try to give him some, help him solidify his standing in there with the Vedanta discourse, the Nyaya Shastra of Vedanta. But when he was converted by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he thought, I made such an offense to think you could not be a sannyasi. You are a sannyasi beyond comparison. You make Brahmananda Bharati, the old deerskin clothed sannyasi, Keshava Bharati, and sannyas Guru, and so forth, tremble by the standard of your adherence to Dharma, which is characteristic of Ram. I see Ram in you. You were Ram, now you're here. And again, you were giving Krishna, praying, you must be Krishna. Sadbhuj. This was his experience. We don't necessarily have to think Chaitanya Mahaprabhu suddenly had 6 arms stuck out. You can, that's okay too. But then he made a deity, 6 arm, that 6 arm form is there. So the point I'm making is they were experiencing these deep people, deeply religious people, and not just religious, but they had a real spiritual kind of trajectory in their lives to transcend material existence. They experienced in Chaitanya all this is a different avatars. Therefore, they conclude he's not only an avatar, he's avatar. He's Krishna himself. That's how they started. They had to write it down. So many books. And some details a little different here and there, but the basic, you could find basic points. He definitely did this. He definitely did that. And he cured the leper. And he brought someone back from the dead. And you can say, well, these old people, they exaggerate all these things, they mythologize about the person and so forth. But if you try to take all of those things away from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you have nothing left. That's what he's made of. He was made of ecstasy and miracles. If you try to dismiss all those things, there's nothing left to be excited about. They saw these things. They witnessed these things. They try to put it into words and write about it. Some Orientalists say, well, I guess he was an epileptic. He seemed to fall into trance and, Mark Gupta was a doctor, and the Ayurveda was familiar with epilepsy. And epilepsy is not contagious. Just by his glance, someone else would start hearing. I mean, what I'm saying is that if you want to strip it down, like just the facts, man, no exaggeration. Sure, they're writing about it poetically. And when he came back from Puri for the first time to Navadvip, so many people came to see him that the river Ganga was filled with people enough that other people would walk on their heads to get to the other side. Obviously, he uses a poetry to describe. He wants to say, I cannot describe how many people and how enthusiastic they were. I have to say it like this. I know it doesn't make any sense, but it's beyond words. How we reacted to his homecoming as a sannyasi, Nimai Pandit. What he will do for the world. where we're going. They didn't even know there was Americas. Now I have to turn this Eurocentric perspective around. We have to showcase this Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and strip it down. Go ahead. You strip it down as much as you can. You're going to be left with so many things. It's just like, I guess it's an avatar by the Hindu standards. And again, who were all the great people who were saying it? What was their status? Kesava Kashmiri, Prakasananda Saraswati, this South India, Venkata, and Pujari, Ramanuja Sampradaya. So we're fortunate to be gathered on such an occasion like this to speak about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He appeared in Navadvip, 48 years. He departed, he left legacy, so many texts commissioned by him, written by the Goswamis, commentaries on him for generations. We have a wealth of such philosophical and theological support for our emotion for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, our feelings for him. Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai. Ji Abhidhamma Mahosava Gaura Purnima Chaitanya Dev ki jai. Nityananda ki jai. Sri Radhagovinda ki jai. Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki jai. This, of course, is giving. Have you heard of Gyan Kanda? Karma Kanda? This is Kevalananda Kanda. Parama Karuna Pahuni Janamitai Gaura Chanda. Parama Karuna Pahuni Janamitai Sabhavatar Sarasi Omani Kevalananda.
Gaura
Hare Hare Bol.
Jayo Jaya Gaura Chande Arthika